Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video, I'm finally getting around to doing another recasting video, not based around Survivor US, and this time finally going to Australian Survivor. Here I'll be doing a recasting video for Australian Survivor All-Stars. Conceptually, this was a video that I've been wanting to do for a while. I mean, this is a cast that I always remembered not being as strong as it could have been. And while I still agree with that assessment to a degree, I will say that after revisiting this cast, it's not nearly as bad as I remembered. But either way, we will be running through the entire cast of Australian Survivor All-Stars in boot order, talking about whether or not they would have been on my cast, obviously in an ideal scenario. So with that, let's jump into the first boot of the season. We do have Shane, obviously the winner of Championship Contenders 1, and to me this is a lock. I mean, I know there is this anti-winner sentiment, and people wouldn't want the winners on All-Star seasons just to avoid that, but again, to me it's like the first All-Star season, despite the target that the winners are going to have on their back, I think it just feels weird to not have the winners on there. And to me, Shane Gould, despite the fact that she was so primed to be the first boot, is also someone that to me needed to be back. Again, to me it just felt weird to not have Shane Gould back on a return for the first All-Stars. So again, easily made in my cut. Next up we have Jericho. Same thing, but even more solidified. I feel like even beyond the fact that they're a winner, Jericho is just naturally a good casting choice. Where like Shane, for me, again, like I think a lot of the appeal of her is the fact that she is a former winner. Jericho is also a great character, is also a solid player, one that is going to play very aggressively, and one that's just going to bring good TV. Plus also he is obviously the winner of what is known to be the best season of the first four. So I think that's an element of it as well. Again, to me, Jericho is such a clear-cut choice here. Not really debate. He's easily on the cast. Next up, we got the first question mark for me, and that is Daisy. And I mean, I'm cutting Daisy. I mean, to me, Daisy was someone that I really had no interest in seeing play again. Didn't particularly like her the first time around. And like, while I get why they cast her, I also wasn't excited to see her back. And to me, this is a pretty easy one to replace. I feel like archetype-wise, they are relatively similar. And we are bringing in one of the winners not on this cast. We are bringing in Christy, the winner of season 1. Again, like I've talked about my criticisms of Christy a billion times at this point, but I think Christy should have been on All-Stars. Now, I know that supposedly she didn't want to be on, but to me, it's just, again, to not have your first winner of the show on All-Stars is just so weird to me, and this was pretty much a clear-cut choice in my opinion. And I do think she has a redemption arc on her return. That would be interesting to see. So again, clear-cut choice for me. Next up, we got Michelle from season 2, and I was a bit hazy on this one. I mean, like, Michelle is someone that I think is solid TV. Again, has some pretty snarky comments, is a fun personality, but also I never felt like she was going to do well on a return. I feel like she was one of these people that was primed to be an early boot on an All-Star season, and we obviously end up seeing that. And me debating this again is not indicative of I didn't want Michelle on the cast. It's more so that I felt like there were other people from season 2 that I would have rather seen more. However, I did still end up leaving Michelle on the cast, as I did find room for those other people with other slots. So again, Michelle still made it on. Next up, we got Henry. And again, Henry to me was one of the bigger locks on the board. I would have been very surprised had they done All-Stars without Henry. It's not like Henry was like that massive of a name necessarily. Again, he was what, like 10th place on his season. But again, obviously like him being blindsided of an idol is a really notable moment there, really notable downfall that he goes through there. Obviously was a massive character in the pre-merge and was just really one of the more active players in the game. So again, for me, Henry was a clear-cut one here as well. Next up, we got Abby, and Abby was a weird one for me, where I did struggle with whether or not to keep Abby on the cast. Again, for me, I was happy to see Abby. I thought Abby had a lot of potential, and I was interested in seeing her back for All-Stars. However, there is another clear-cut person in Janine from that season that would also be a really interesting returnee as well. And also the winner of her season, that would have been an interesting spot as well. That could have easily taken her spot here. However, I decided to keep Abby, largely because I decided to replace a certain other person with the winner of the season, and through that found room for Abby. But again, like I would not be opposed to getting rid of Abby here. It's just that I did feel like that potential was there, and it would have been interesting to see it. While with someone like a Janine, it's just that I don't know how much potential was really there for a return. So again, for me, I put Abby on the cast. Next up, we got Lydia, and I cut Lydia. Now, Lydia is an interesting figure because like she was actually probably one of the bigger locks on the board. Like I think Lydia was like clearly one of the people that they wanted to bring back here. The thing is that I had no interest in seeing Lydia back. Again, I did not feel like Lydia was going to change on return. I didn't feel like there was much to really get from her returning here. So I did cut her. And again, like this is where I put Pia. Again, I think Pia, again, being the last winner on the board. Now, at this point, I have all the winners on this cast. Again, someone that should have been on this cast. Again, I know she turned it down, but still, to me, to really hold this legacy of the first All-Star season, I think having Pia on it definitely bolsters the appeal of this cast. So, again, put her on. Next up, we got John. And, I mean, as I said in my cast assessment, I mean, who is John? I still don't know that much about John outside of, I guess, him being a somewhat notable personality. Again, to me, I did not need to see John back. I think John's an easy one for me to cut. Again, I get why they cast it. I don't think it was like a bizarre casting choice. But again, to me, it's like I didn't need to see John back. Question is who to replace him with. And I mean, there's a number of options. The question for me was how I wanted this cast to look at the end of it. Did I want this to be a cast of the greatest players Australian Survivor has seen? Or did I want it to be a cast that was filled with people that had potential? And I feel like that was like the tough thing for me to quantify here. Again, like I did consider people like an Andrew from season 1, or probably more notably a Craig. I would have loved to see Craig back. But as much as I would have liked to see Craig back, I do feel like he feels out of place on this cast. Again, like especially after all the changes that I end up making to it, like this ends up being a cast of the who's who essentially of Australian Survivor. And like for Craig, someone who again was fairly forgotten about at this point, though I think he played a very strong game considering his placement, like it just would have felt out of place. So the person I ended up going with here was probably the biggest name in the history of the show that wasn't on this season, and that was Luke. Obviously Luke was on season 4. Pretty sure he turned down All-Stars. Makes sense. But also, it makes me question why they wasted him on Championship Contenders too. Considering, again, like he's a lock for All-Stars. Like, had that not happened, he would have been on All-Stars for sure. It just feels bizarre to me that we had an All-Star season without Luke. So again, decided to go with Luke here as, again, feels like the pretty clear-cut choice. Now we're in a string of players that I kept on the cast, so not much intrigue here, but let's run through them anyway. Obviously, we got Matt Rogers. Again, Matt Rogers, to me, one of the bigger locks on the board. I can't imagine them doing All-Stars without Matt Rogers. He was someone that was such a big figure on Championship Contenders, was such a big player. Really no chance that they didn't bring him on here. Next up, we got Phoebe. Same thing. Again, Phoebe, despite her being pre-merge, was also such a notable figure in that pre-merge. Had a ridiculous amount of confessionals. I believe even by the end of the season, she is tied, I believe, with Christy for number of confessionals, which is the second most confessionals of the season, despite her being in half the episodes. Like, I mean, Phoebe is such a major figure there. Obviously has the idol play and really has this like massive underdog arc throughout that season. Again, clear-cut person to bring back. So we got Flick. Same thing. Guaranteed person to bring back. Such a big figure on the original season, was such a big player, especially by the end of the season. Her blindside of Brooke is such a notable moment for the series. Clear-cut person to bring back. Next up, we got Nick, and this one was a little bit more hazy. I mean, like, I think Nick is someone that, yeah, you still bring back Nick. He is kind of like the first, like, super fan of the show that really gets promoted as such. And, like, obviously, I was interested in seeing him back. I'll be honest, like, I think in retrospect, like, did he absolutely need to be there? Not really, to me. Like, I feel like we just kind of got more of the same, except that the climate of the game was a bit more fortuitous to him. But still, I mean, like, Nick being back, again, not a bad choice. Probably the best choice out of anyone in his archetype. Next up, we got Locke, and Locke was an interesting one to me. I did consider some other people for Locke, namely Sean Hampson from season 4. Again, I thought that would have been an interesting person to have back. However, I think at the end of the day, Locke is a more notable figure. He made it to Final 5, had a decent underdog run at the end there with him winning immunities. Just overall has a more notable arc across the season, so I felt like I had to leave Locke on. Next up, we got Harry. Again, I mean, Locke. I mean, especially just coming off of season 4 and seeing how dynamic of a game he ended up playing there. Again, I think you have to have Harry on this cast. Makes no sense to not have him on. Next up, we got Lee. Again, Locke for me. Again, I know people will probably question Lee considering he was like this figurehead for the mateship element of the game. However, again, for me, I do feel like he needed to be a Locke. I think he is a really interesting figure here, coming back for Redemption, being the first runner-up of the show, and really just seemed to be a decent all-around player. And I feel like seeing him now play with the landscape of the game changing a bit since he first played is interesting enough to have him here on the list. And now we're finally getting to some changes. We're on to Zach, and this is a clear-cut case for me. Again, swap Zach with Benji. Now, again, I believe Benji turned it down, and that is why they got Zach to begin with, but I mean, even then, like, I would have gone with, like, Heath over Zach. I would have loved to see a Heath return personally, but again, I mean, like, here, it's Benji. Like, it's Benji. Like, it has to be Benji. I mean, there's no other real option. This is such a clear-cut case to me of, like, who to replace Zach with. Again, pretty easy. Next up, we got Jacky, who I will say, I was actually excited to see Jacky initially, and while it didn't turn out, again, her role on the season definitely was very underwhelming. I thought Jacky was someone that had potential on season 2. The thing is, though, is that it's mind-blowing to me that they cast Jacky without casting some other people, namely Sarah. Again, like, how do you not have Sarah on? I think the rumors that they'd even call Sarah, which is insane. It's like, how do you not have Sarah on the cast? Again, she was just such a notable figure on season 2 to me, to where, like, I thought she was one of the bigger locks on the board to return for All Stars, and to know that she wasn't even in consideration is insane. So for me, this was a very clear-cut one of an easy one to put on the cast. Next up, we got Shawnee, and I mean, Shawnee's a lock. I mean, I would find it tough to replace her. I mean, again, like, to me, having Shawnee and Michelle both on the same cast, again, I feel like they are a very similar archetype. But even then, like, I would have picked Shawnee over Michelle, personally. Really, at the end of the day, and there wasn't really much consideration to take her off here. Next up, we got AK, and AK was interesting to me because I did consider swapping AK, largely just due to the fact that he was a pre-juror. But, I mean, again, I don't think there's a great replacement for him, and even then, again, I think he's in a similar mold to, like, a Phoebe, where, like, he just had such a big impact on his season despite being a pre-juror that I still think they should be a lock. Again, AK was someone I was excited to see play again, so again, he made it on. Next up, we have Tarzan, and Tarzan, to me, is one of these figures that, again, I 100% get why they cast him, but again, I never wanted to see Tarzan back. Now, I do understand this element of, on All-Star seasons, that it is cool to see someone like a Tarzan, someone that doesn't know the game at all, and seeing other people have to navigate around them, kind of in a similar case to how, like, a Keith Nail was handled on Cambodia. But I feel like when you have a casting pool this strong, again, there are still people that I just rather have seen back. With the one person that really comes to mind to me being Brian Lake. Now, I get Brian Lake was probably not in the right spot in his life to return at this point. But again, coming off of Championship Contenders, again, I was surprised that we didn't hear more about a potential Brian Lake return, considering he is such a massive figure in the endgame stretch of that season, being the main source of conflict across that season, with Matt Rogers trying to target him, only for him to take him out and then flip against Benji, and then eventually gets flipped on himself by Shawnee at the final 5. And it's like, I really felt like Brian brought a lot to that season, especially from someone that was a former athlete, where I think he played the game in a very ruthless manner for someone with his background. And I thought that was an interesting aspect of Brian's game. So again, for me, like, I personally would rather see Brian back. Again, I get why they cast Tarzan, but for me, again, I went with Brian. Next up, we have Brooke. And Brooke is an interesting one because I always felt like Brooke was kind of underrated coming into All-Stars. I was obviously, like, hoping for Brooke, but I could have seen a world where they would have passed her up. Again, was happy that she was on the cast, but also just genuinely surprised that they picked Brooke over Sarah, which always felt weird to me. But again, to me, Brooke was a pretty big lock here, especially with her dynamic with Flick. Again, to me, pretty easy choice. Next up, we're moving on to Moana. And again, Mo's another one that, like, I saw a level of potential in her on Championship Contenders 1. I did always feel like if she hadn't gotten sick, she was in a really good position to do well. So in a sense, again, it's a similar thing to like a Jacky, where, like, I wasn't opposed to her coming back here. However, there's just other people I would have rather seen back. And again, another big one from season 2 that I was surprised wasn't on the cast. Those, again, I believe this person turned it down, but still, I would have put on Tessa. Yeah, I think Tessa is a player that demonstrated a lot of potential on her original run. Like, while she'd have a very rocky start, that also led to her getting a lot of screen time based around her relationship with Tarzan. And again, beyond that, I think she played pretty well. I was being a victim of that really crazy plurality vote, and Ozzy was a major instigator in the Henry blindside. So again, I feel like there was a lot of potential in Tessa, and again, I'm pretty sure she turned it down, but again, if she didn't, again, very clear spot for her here. I put her on the cast. And now for the final two, both of which made the cut, but we'll talk about why. So starting off with Sharon. Again, Sharon, runner-up of Championship Contenders 1. Absolute lock. I think Sharon was a big lock coming into All-Stars. Again, was runner-up of the season, was one of the major characters of the season, but was also one of the major players of the season. I mean, unlike someone like a Tara, who didn't make my recast here, who was a runner-up, and did also end up with the most confessionals by the end of the season, I didn't feel like Tara had much more to give to the show. I felt like she was straight up just not that good of a player. And while I wouldn't have been opposed to Tara being back, again, she didn't make the cut. But again, for me, Sharon, again, is pretty much everything you would want legacy-wise for a returnee here. So again, she made the cut for me. And then obviously we got David. And David was, again, one of the bigger locks on the board, having just come from his season where he was one of the biggest characters on that season, especially up until his boot. I believe he did have the most confessionals up until that point. He pretty much dominated a lot of the pre-merge screen time through his relationship with Luke, through his rivalry with Sean, through him just being a really great confessionalist. Again, like David to me, again, one of the bigger locks on the board, clearly made the cut. But there we go. I mean, that is my recasting of Australian Survivor All-Stars. Again, not as many changes as I expected. Only 7 changes to the cast here. Which, I mean, again, it gets weird because I always look at this cast as an underwhelming cast. But really, it's only like a fourth of the cast that is like kind of mediocre. And like even then, I mean, people like a Lydia, a John, a Daisy, even a Tarzan. Like, I get their casting choices. Jacky and Moana, again, had potential. So, I mean, really, it's just Zach. That is like the really egregious pick here to me. But considering how many people turned it down or weren't in the right state of mind, again, like, I get a lot of the casting choices that they made. But again, the Sarah one is pretty egregious. But either way, let's run through my cast. From season 1, we do have Christy, Phoebe, Flick, Nick, Lee, and Brooke. From season 2, we have Jericho, Michelle, Henry, Luke, Locke, Sarah, AK, and Tessa. Again, 8 people, which is a third of the cast, but again, it deserves it. From season 3, we have Shane, Matt Rogers, Benji, Shawnee, Brian, and Sharon. And from season 4, we do have Abby, Pia, Harry, and David. Again, reducing that field to only 4 people. So that is my recast of Australian Survivor All-Stars. Again, down the road, I would like to do more recasting videos for things outside of just Survivor US. It's really just finding the time on the schedule to do them. But again, this was a top priority one for me, as I always felt like this was an interesting one to run through. But yeah, for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.